For years, my husband looked me in the eyes and told me I was nothing. Not once, not twice, but enough times that I started to believe him. I was just a wife, just a homemaker, just lucky to have him, and I stayed. God help me. I stayed. But the thing about being treated like nothing is, one day, you realize you have nothing left to lose. And when that day comes, someone like me becomes the most dangerous person in the room. Now he's the one calling, texting, begging, and do you know what I did? I blocked his number and walked away in my favorite pair of heels. But to really understand why Daniel is now choking on the taste of his own arrogance, you have to know where this all began. When I first met Daniel, he wasn't the man who called me nothing. Back then, he was the man who made me laugh until my cheeks hurt. The man who swore he'd build a life where I'd never have to worry about anything again. I was 27, fresh out of a marketing job I'd hated, finally breathing after years of grinding. Daniel was magnetic. He walked into a CAF where I was working on my RSM, and he asked me what I was drinking. Not in that creepy, pick-up line way, but with genuine curiosity, as if my coffee choice might reveal something about my soul. Caramel latte, I said. Sweet, he smirked. Matches your vibe. He was the kind of man who could make a compliment sound like a conspiracy you wanted to be in on. We went on our first date the next night. Our second date 2 days later. By the end of the month, I'd met his friends, his family, even his dog. Daniel was starting a small real estate business at the time, nothing huge, but enough to keep him busy. I was the one with steady income, and I didn't mind helping him here and there. Looking back, I see how the first seeds of control were planted. But at the time, I thought it was love. We got married in an outdoor ceremony under twinkling lights. He kissed me like the world would end if he stopped. People whispered that we were the couple everyone else wanted to be. And for a while, I believed it. When Daniel suggested I quit my job so I could focus on us and help him with his business, I didn't hesitate. I had savings. He had ambition. It felt like a partnership, but partnerships, they don't usually involve one person holding all the money. At first, he'd say things like, "Babe, let me handle the finances, you've got enough to do." Then it became, "Why are you spending so much on groceries?" And then, the first real slap to my pride. At a dinner with his friends, one of them asked what I did. Before I could answer, Daniel laughed. "She's nothing. Just my little housewife." They laughed. I laughed too, because what else was I supposed to do? Cry in the middle of a restaurant? I told myself it was a joke. That's what women like me do. We tell ourselves the cruelty is comedy. If only I'd known then that it was the first crack in the glass, and that soon it would shatter completely. I wish I could tell you that dinner was a one-time slip, a bad joke that didn't reflect how he really felt. But the truth is, that was the night I started keeping score. Every time he called me nothing, every time he rolled his eyes when I spoke, every time he spoke about me instead of to me, I wrote it down in my head like invisible tally marks on a prison wall. In the beginning, they were small things. He'd criticize how I folded laundry, saying it wasn't efficient. He'd sigh when I told a story, as if my words were taking up air he needed to breathe. When I cooked, he'd sprinkle extra salt over the food without even tasting it. First little acts that said, "You're not good enough, not even at this." Then came the money. When I quit my job, I thought I was stepping into a shared life, a team effort. Instead, I stepped into a gilded cage. The joint account slowly became his account. He gave me a household budget and made me justify every purchase. A bottle of shampoo that wasn't the cheapest brand. Why waste money on that? Coffee with a friend? Must be nice to spend all day socializing while I work. It wasn't just control, it was erosion. Erosion of my independence. Erosion of my voice. And like erosion, it was slow enough that I almost didn't notice until pieces of me had already washed away. There were good days, of course there were. That's what kept me there. The dinners where he looked at me like I was still the girl in the CAF. The nights when he'd tell me his plans for the future and make me feel like I was part of them. I clung to those moments like they were proof I wasn't crazy. But then, in the middle of those good days, he'd slip. Once, at his company's holiday party, I was chatting with one of his newer employees. She asked me if I worked in real estate too. I started to explain that I'd helped Danielle with marketing in the early days, but before I could finish, he stepped in, laughing loud enough for the table to hear. She's nothing to do with the business. Just here to look pretty. The room laughed. I smiled through it, pretending it didn't slice through me. Inside, I burned. But I told myself to let it go. To keep the peace. Keeping the peace was the goal, right? That peace shattered the night I found his phone buzzing at 2 in the morning. He was asleep beside me, snoring lightly. I told myself I wasn't that kind of wife, the kind who snoops. But the phone buzzed again and again. Finally, I reached for it. The first message I saw was from someone named BN. I miss you already. Last night was amazing. My stomach dropped. I scrolled. There were weeks, months of messages. Not just one woman. 2, 3. Some were flirty. Some explicit. Some mentioned things he'd told me he hated, places he'd said he'd never go, experiences he swore he wasn't into. Turns out, he just wasn't into them with me. I sat there in the dark, phone in my hand, looking at the man I'd given up everything for. The man who called me nothing. And I thought, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in the living room, staring at the wall, hearing the clock tick and wondering how a man could share a bed with someone for years, then live this whole other life in secret. By the time the sun rose, I had made up my mind. When he stumbled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, I slid his phone across the counter toward him. He glanced at it, then at me. Why are you going through my phone? I almost laughed. That was his opening line. Not I can explain. Not it's not what you think. Just a deflection. Like I was the problem. I didn't have to go through your phone, I said. It was blowing up all night. Guess your little girlfriends can't sleep without you. His jaw tightened. Don't make this into something. It's not. Oh, so the messages about last night were about what Bible study? That got a smirk out of him. A smug, dismissive smirk. You're overreacting. You've been cooped up in this house too long. No wonder you're acting crazy. Something inside me snapped. I gave up my career for you. My friends. My freedom. I paid off your debts with my inheritance. And this is how you treat me. He shrugged, leaning against the counter like we were discussing the weather. You were nothing before me, Lena. You'd still be nothing without me. At least now you have a nice house to be nothing in. Those words. That exact sentence. It was like he'd rehearsed it for years, waiting for the perfect moment to drop it like a hammer. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even throw the coffee mug in my hand, though God knows I wanted to. Instead, I smiled. Because in that exact moment, I understood something. If I left now, I'd walk away with nothing, just like he said. But if I stayed, quietly, without tipping my hand, I could take everything. So I told him he was right. That I was overreacting. That I'd drop it. And I watched the tension melt off his face. Watched him walk out the door thinking he'd won. He didn't know the war had just started. That day I called a lawyer. Not for divorce yet. For advice. I learned something very interesting. Every dollar I'd put into his business in those early years made me a legal CEO owner. 50%. And then another little fact. Because we were married, any marital assets, houses, accounts, properties were half mine. I hung up the phone feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Power. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to beg him to love me again. I was going to dismantle his life, one quiet, calculated move at a time. For the next few weeks, I became the perfect wife. I cooked his favorite meals. I laughed at his stupid jokes. I even asked about his day, like I actually cared about the fabricated stories he told. If he noticed how much time I spent running errands, he didn't mention it. Those errands weren't for groceries, they were for meetings. Lawyers, accountants, old friends from my marketing days who owed me favors. The first step was information. I learned where every dollar in our household was going. I memorized account numbers, property deeds, and the list of his business partners. I downloaded copies of emails he'd sent, emails that proved his affairs weren't just personal betrayals, but potential business liabilities. You'd be amazed at what a man will put in writing when he thinks his wife isn't paying attention. The second step was leverage. A friend of mine from college, Sarah, now worked in forensic accounting. I told her everything, well, almost everything, and she agreed to help me organize Daniel's financial records. What she found was better than gold. Some of his transactions were questionable, money moving in ways that could raise eyebrows from more than just me. I didn't plan to ruin him with the IRS or the law, not yet, but it was comforting to know I could, if I had to. The third step was rebuilding my own identity. I opened a private bank account in my name only. I took on a few freelance marketing clients under the radar, working from a coffee shop downtown. It felt good, no, it felt electric to get paid for my skills again. To have my own money, my own hours, my own sense of self, coming back piece by piece. All the while, Daniel thought life was back to normal. He'd come home late, reeking of cologne I didn't wear, claiming he had business dinners. I didn't ask questions anymore. He took my silence as submission. What he didn't know was that my silence was the sound of the noose tightening. One night, as I was sorting through a stack of old business documents, I found something that nearly made me laugh out loud. The original incorporation papers for his real estate company, papers I had signed as a partner. He'd forgotten that I still had the originals. And in black and white legal print, there it was. 50% ownership, equal voting rights. In that moment, I realized something delicious. I didn't need to just take what was mine. I could take him out of his own empire. But to do that, I needed one more thing, the perfect moment to strike. That moment came sooner than I expected. It happened on a Wednesday, one of those gray afternoons where the sky feels too heavy for the world. Daniel was on a call in his home office, pacing like a predator in a cage. I wasn't listening on purpose, but when he raises his voice, you can hear him anywhere in the house. Listen, he barked. If they don't like the numbers, they can walk. I'll find someone else. Pause. No, she's not part of This. She doesn't know anything. She. That little pronoun was me. And the way he said it like I was some ignorant bystander made my jaw clench. When he left later for yet another late meeting, curiosity got the better of me. I slipped into his office and glanced at the desk. There, half buried under contracts and receipts, was a manila folder marked Confidential Shareholders. I opened it. Inside was a quarterly report showing a steady drop in revenue, plus a letter from one of his biggest investors threatening to pull out unless changes were made. It wasn't just the business in trouble, Daniel was in trouble, and that's when it hit me. If the investors knew I was an equal owner with voting rights, they could see me as their solution. Daniel was impulsive, arrogant, bad for the company's image. I was polished, strategic, and had already been doing behind-the-scenes marketing. In the early days, he thought I was nothing, but to them, I could be the one thing standing between them and financial disaster. That night, while he was out, I made a call to the lead investor, Mr. Callahan. I didn't play the scorned wife. I played the professional, calm, collected. I told him I had been reviewing the company's recent performance and had ideas for stabilizing profits. There was a pause, then a surprise. I didn't even know you were involved in the company. Exactly. Daniel had kept me invisible until I decided to step into the light. By the end of the call, Mr. Callahan agreed to meet me for lunch the next day. I hung up feeling that rush again, the one that comes from knowing you're not just surviving anymore. You're plotting. You're winning. When Daniel came home that night, I kissed him on the cheek and asked if he wanted me to make pasta. He smiled, thinking I was still the wife who'd let him walk all over me. If only he knew the knives I had hidden behind my back weren't in the kitchen. Mr. Callahan was exactly as I remembered from the few company events I'd attended in the early days, tall, silver-haired, with that unshakable confidence of a man who's built and lost fortunes and lived to tell the tale. We met at a quiet corner table in an upscale restaurant downtown. He ordered black coffee. I went for green tea because my hands were already steady, but my mind was on fire. I have to admit, he began, I didn't even know you had a stake in the company. I smiled politely. That's by design. Daniel thought it was better for me to stay behind the scenes, but as you can see from the quarterly reports, that strategy hasn't exactly been working. He raised an eyebrow, inviting me to go on. I didn't dump everything on him at once, that would make me look desperate. Instead, I started with numbers. How the brand image had shifted over time, how online engagement was down, how he was over-leveraging properties in unstable markets. I threw in a few pointed but subtle critiques about leadership style and public perception, letting him draw his own conclusions about Daniel's, shall we say, shortcomings. Callahan nodded slowly, sipping his coffee. You sound like you've done your homework. I've lived it, I said simply. Then I leaned forward, lowering my voice just enough to make him lean in too. I'm not asking for anything right now, but if things continue on the same path, the investors will have to make a choice. And I want you to know that I'm ready to step in if the board decides a change is necessary. He studied me for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning. Investors don't care about egos, they care about money. And I had just positioned myself as the calm, competent alternative to Daniel's recklessness. By the end of lunch, he shook my hand and said, if it comes to that, you'll hear from me. Walking out of that restaurant, I felt the sun on my face in a way I hadn't in years. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was quietly moving into position. That night, Daniel came home ranting about idiot investors who didn't understand his vision. I nodded, poured him a drink, and let him think I was on his side. Inside, I was counting down the days until his vision no longer mattered. It didn't take long for the cracks in Daniel's golden boy image to widen. 2 weeks after my lunch with Mr. Callahan, I got a call from another investor, Miss Rivera, a woman I remembered as razor-sharp and impossible to impress. Her tone was all business. "I hear you've been looking over the company numbers. Callahan says you might have a plan." I said, letting a beat of silence stretch just enough to make her lean in metaphorically. "We arranged to meet in her office." I came prepared with printouts, charts showing the declining returns, marketing gaps, and a projection that, if Daniel stayed at the helm, profits would nosedive within the year. "Daniel never showed me this," she said, flipping through the pages. "Of course not. He doesn't want anyone to know how bad it's getting," I replied. I kept my voice calm, almost sympathetic, as if I were protecting Daniel from himself. "It wasn't a lie, at least, not in the way I told it. B. Why the end of the meeting, Miss?" Rivera's expression had shifted from skepticism to calculation. I knew that look. She was already imagining the boardroom without Daniel in it. Meanwhile, at home, Daniel was unraveling. The deals he'd been counting on kept slipping through his fingers. He blamed market trends and incompetent partners, never once considering that maybe he was the problem. One evening, he slammed his laptop shut so hard the sound echoed through the house. "These idiots are threatening to pull funding," he snarled. "Can you believe that?" I set a plate of dinner in front of him and said, "You'll figure it out. You always do." He didn't notice the way I turned away to hide my smile. Behind the scenes, I was quietly building a coalition. By the end of the month, I had spoken with 4 of the 5 major investors. 3 of them were firmly in my corner. The 4th was hesitant, but I could feel him leaning. It was only a matter of time before the vote, and then fate handed me the perfect weapon. Daniel, in his infinite arrogance, decided to throw a lavish client dinner to restore confidence. What he didn't know was that one of the women he'd been sleeping with was married to a minor investor, and she was furious after finding out about the others. She called me. "I don't know what your plan is," she said, "but I'm in. And I have proof." The proof. Photos, messages, dates, all tying Daniel's affairs directly to business trips funded by the company. If that didn't scream misuse of resources, I didn't know what did. I didn't even have to dig for the dirt anymore. It was falling into my lap, gift-wrapped. The summons for the board meeting came in a cut email from Mr. Callahan. "Urgent shareholder discussion. Attendance required." Daniel assumed it was about restructuring to save his sinking projects. He swaggered around the house that morning, rehearsing speeches about vision and leadership, completely oblivious to the fact that he was walking into his own execution. I dressed carefully, professional but understated. A tailored navy dress, hair in a neat twist, no flashy jewelry. I wanted to look like the adult in the room. When we arrived, the air was thick with tension. The other investors were already seated around the long mahogany table. Mr. Callahan sat at the head, expression unreadable. The meeting began with a review of the quarterly report. Numbers tanking, clients pulling out, investor confidence at an all-time low. Daniel leaned forward, launching into a defensive rant. "We just need more time, Miss." Rivera cut him off. "Time isn't the problem, Daniel. Leadership is there. Room went still. He blinked, then laughed like she'd told a joke. What's that supposed to mean? That was my cue. I slid a folder onto the table. Inside was the financial analysis I'd been compiling for weeks: declining revenues, risky investments, and, at the very back, the damning evidence from the scorned lover: photos, messages, hotel receipts paid for with company funds. Daniel's smirk faltered as he flipped through the pages. "This is private," he snapped at me. "You have no right." "I have every right," I said evenly. "As a 50% owner, my responsibility is to protect the company's interests. And your actions have put those interests at risk." The words 50% owner rippled through the room like a shockwave. He turned to Callahan. "She's not." "Yes, she is," Callahan interrupted. "It's in the incorporation papers. You've been operating as if you were sole owner, Daniel, but legally, you're not." The vote happened faster than I expected. 4 in favor of removing Daniel as CEO. 1 abstention. The motion passed. Daniel sat there, stunned, as Callahan announced, effective immediately, "Lena will assume interim leadership while we restructure operations." I met his eyes. No gloating, no smug smile, just calm finality. Because the real victory wasn't in humiliating him, it was in taking away the one thing he valued more than anything: control. When the meeting adjourned, he stormed out without a word. I stayed behind, shaking hands, discussing next steps. Already moving forward without him, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Maybe it was just the air conditioning, but it felt like the temperature had dropped a few degrees as soon as we walked in. My lawyer, Miss Price, whispered something about strategy and keeping calm, but my eyes were locked on my parents. They were seated at the plaintiff's table, looking smug, as if the entire hearing was just a formality before the court handed them everything they wanted. Mom had her chin lifted, eyes darting to the spectators behind us, probably checking who came to see their victory. Dad was leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, wearing that infuriating smirk I'd seen every time he thought he was winning. When the judge called the case, my parents' attorney launched into this long, dramatic speech about family duty and how much they had invested in me since birth. He painted me like an ungrateful child who had abandoned her family after using them for support. I could practically hear the scoff in the judge's throat. Ms. Price stood up next, and her tone was calm, but sharp enough to cut through their lies. She started with fact states, receipts, transactions. Every claim my parents made, she counted, with documented proof. Then, she dropped the bigger one: the forensic audit results. The room went still when she explained that the so-called investment my parents made in me was actually money siphoned from my late grandmother's trust money that was supposed to go entirely to me. She had the original will, the trust papers, and even bank records showing my parents had been withdrawing from it for years to fund their lavish vacations and my brother's failed business ventures. Dad shifted in his seat. Mom's lips tightened. When the judge turned to them, his tone was icy. "Do you have anything to dispute these findings?" Their lawyer stammered something about misunderstandings in family finances, but it was too late. The damage was done. The judge didn't just deny their claim, he ordered them to repay the amount they had taken, plus penalties. I felt a rush of vindication, but it wasn't over yet. As we walked out, Mom's hand shot out to grab my arm. Her nails dug into my skin. "You'll regret humiliating us like this," she hissed. I met her gaze and smiled, not the sweet kind she was used to, but one laced with years of quiet fury. No, mom. You're just not used to me winning. But I wasn't celebrating yet. Because I knew my parents losing in court wouldn't stop them. It would just make them more dangerous. And the next move they made could destroy more than my finances. And I was going to be ready for it. The first morning after the verdict, I woke up without the familiar weight of anxiety pressing on my chest. The house felt different, lighter, like the walls themselves were sighing in relief. I brewed my coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the sunlight cutting through the blinds. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Please. We need to talk. I can't believe what's happening. Can we meet? I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. I didn't reply. The following week, I focused on rebuilding not just my finances, but my life. I reopened my marketing consultancy officially, hired a small team, and reclaimed projects I had quietly nurtured while pretending to be just a housewife. Clients came back, investors called, opportunities I hadn't dared imagine opened up, as if the universe itself was compensating for all those years Daniel and my parents had tried to erase me. Then came Daniel's calls, texts, even emails. He begged. He promised. He swore he'd change. I read every message and deleted them, one by one. He had no idea how much power I now held. He had no idea I controlled half his company, could influence investors, and had the freedom he had always taken for granted. The man who once called me nothing was now nothing to me. And it wasn't just Daniel who had to learn that lesson. My parents, too, faced the consequences of their greed. They repaid the trust fund, asset by asset, under the watchful eye of the court. I didn't gloat. I simply let the law do its work while I focused on my own empire. Months passed. I moved into a new office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. My team thrived, my clients trusted me, and my reputation, once buried beneath years of humiliation, was stronger than ever. One morning, as I walked into my office in my favorite heels, I paused to glance at the city skyline. It sparkled in the morning sun, just like my future. Daniel's number appeared on my phone again. I looked at it, then at my reflection in the glass. I tilted my chin slightly, straightened my shoulders, and tapped block. The sound of the block confirmation felt like the click of a door finally shutting. A door I would never open again. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, leaned back in my chair, and allowed myself to finally feel something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Not revenge. Not triumph. Peace. Because sometimes the sweetest victory isn't in making someone suffer, it's in reclaiming your life and walking away from those who tried to break you. Stronger, smarter, and unstoppable. And as I looked out over the city, I knew that for the first time, I was truly free. For years, he made me feel invisible. He called me nothing, treated me like I was replaceable, and laughed at my dreams. But I learned something crucial. Being underestimated isn't a weakness, it's an opportunity. Every insult, every betrayal, every quiet moment of humiliation became fuel. I didn't take my revenge out of anger. I took it out of necessity, because reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my power was the only way to survive. And when I finally walked away, leaving him and all the people who doubted me behind, I realized the sweetest victory wasn't in proving them wrong. It was in proving myself right, because nothing, and I mean nothing, can ever take away your worth unless you let it. So I took my heels, my head held high, and my future in my hands, and I walked into a life they could never touch, and that was freedom. Thanks for watching. Hoped you liked it. If you watched till the end, please comment revenge so that we could understand you were with us till the end. As well as, please let us know, where are you watching from? What do you want to hear from us in next video? If you have any incident in your life, please let us know. We would love to share your story. Before leaving, please hit the subscribe button, comment your thought, and share with your nearest and dearest one. See you in the next one. Until to the next one, stay happy.